Hello, today I wanted to talk to you about the criteria that I use when I choose my beauty and cosmetic products, because I talk a lot about natural products, but then there are some products that I use that are not natural, so I think it would be good to kind of clarify why I use the products I use and how I choose them in terms of ingredients. And so there's two things that are really important to me. Number one is that it's safe, and number two is that it works. And I like to use safe rather than natural, even though I say natural a lot in other videos because a lot of people associate with that word, and a lot of companies will plaster that all over their products. But really what's important is safety, because there are some man-made ingredients that are really safe, and there are some natural ingredients that are not safe, for example. So finding something that is safe, whether it's natural or man-made, that's what's most important to me. And just to give you an example, neem oil, that's a natural thing, that's a natural oil, but it's dangerous to you if you're pregnant. Or vitamin A in the form of palmitate, retinol palmitate, that is technically natural because you find that in meat. It's different from vitamin A that you find in carrots, which is called beta carotene, but it's kind of the animal, not like the produce form, but the animal form of vitamin A is retinol palmitate. So it's not necessarily man-made chemical or anything like that. It's a natural vitamin, but if you put that on your skin and then you're exposed to sunlight, that has been linked to skin cancer. So natural, doesn't always mean safe, just like man-made doesn't always mean, harmful, terrible chemical, in my opinion. So I like to research the ingredients that I use, and of course it's not always possible to do thorough research on every single ingredient and every single product that you may have, because it might just be, a huge long list. But I try my best, and I like to use the Skin Deep database. There's a lot of information there. You can look up ingredients and they rate the ingredients in terms of safety. Of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that, your views and their views are gonna necessarily be the same, and you might want to do some research on your own if something seems, questionable to you, if you think you disagree. And then there's some things that don't have a lot of information out there just because there hasn't been a lot of studies, a lot of research on a particular thing. So then it's just kind of up to you whether you feel safe using it or not. And I like to also look at things in perspective, like how much of these, makeup skincare products are you actually using? Say you put a foundation all over your face, it's the equivalent of like a quarter size, or probably even smaller, like pump of liquid foundation, or just like a small amount of powder or whatever. How much things from that product are actually absorbing into your skin, or actually getting into your system? It's probably just like a tiny little amount. And I'm not saying that that's, irrelevant, and as long as you use tiny amounts, of dangerous things, that's okay, because it's obviously not. But I like to just kind of look at the big picture and look at my exposure to chemicals overall, not just in terms of makeup, because one, huge aspect of your exposure to toxins and chemicals and carcinogens is, of course, your environment and what you eat. And there's things that you can control, like what you eat, and then there's things that you can't control, like formaldehyde and other chemicals seeping out, of carpet and paint in a house. I mean, there's really not much you can do about that. And in terms of food, that is really my focus. I know this video is not about food, but just to go off on a tangent for a little bit, that is where I feel like my primary exposure would be to, harmful substances. And so I try, that's like my most important thing, is I try to, not eat any thing that is potentially dangerous, any chemicals, any dyes, anything like that. I'm really careful about, not just the food itself, but what I cook it in, how I cook it, literally like the plates I eat off of. I have researched into that because some some can contain lead and stuff like that. And so, I mean, maybe some of those things are minimal, but some of those things, are great. If you, eat something directly, I would think, going directly into your body and being absorbed, by your system in large amounts, because you eat food, much larger amounts than you put on makeup. So that is, that's kind of my biggest concern, and that's what I tend to focus on, and that is what I'm most stringent on. And then when it comes to makeup, so for example, I love lip products and different lip colors. And one concern with lip colors is that sometimes they contain dyes. You cannot make all the different colors with natural pigments that you can with dyes. And so because that's one aspect, of makeup that I really enjoy and I really love, and I would really have to give up a lot of products if I were just to stop using dyes altogether. I kind of think of it in terms of like, okay, so if I eat this red popsicle, which I wouldn't do, that has all these dyes in it, there is so much more red dye in this popsicle, or in Jell-O, for example, or even like croissants. If you look at ingredients of some, baked goods, they will have yellow dye, like literally dyes in there to make it more yellow, to expose you to more chemicals, even though it's like, why does it need that? It always like boggles my mind that they add all these things that I feel like, do you really need that, in the food? But anyways, so I would have to eat like a whole tube of lipstick to get the same amount of dye. And the tube of lipstick, even if I use up the whole thing, it's not like I ate the whole thing. Sure, sometimes you lick your lips, you definitely ingest some of what you're wearing on your lips a little bit, but it's literally like trace amounts compared to the dyes that you would get from food. And so because I avoid dyes in food, completely 100%, I feel like exposing myself to these trace amounts is not worth, it's not worth giving up my favorite lipstick to avoid exposing myself to such a small amount of dye, which is, nothing compared to what an average person would consume. I do, however, make sure that I use food grade dyes, because there are dyes that are only cosmetic grade that I feel are more dangerous, and you're not even allowed to eat them, so I just avoid them altogether. But like my lipstick, Silk Naturals uses food grade dyes, and I feel, pretty comfortable and safe wearing their lip products. Then there's things like chemical sunscreens, which I avoid altogether, because the way that physical sunscreens like zinc and titanium oxides work is they reflect sunlight, away from you, but chemical sunscreens, they absorb it. And so in both cases, you don't get sunburned, but when the chemicals absorb it, the free radicals and, kind of like the negative energy, if you want to think of it that way, from the sun, it's not reflected away, it stays on your skin, and so it can cause damage to your skin, not to mention the chemicals from the chemical sunscreens, they do to some extent absorb into your skin. I just don't find it necessary to take that risk when there's a perfectly safe alternative that works just as well for me. So now I'm getting into, products that work. And products that work actually is, two parts for me. First, I can have a product that works really good for me for like 2 hours and then it creases and fades and smudges, etc. But it's all, super duper, safe, natural, whatever you want to think of it, ingredients. I'm not going to necessarily never use that product because it lasts such a short time. I actually, when I do my makeup, I think about, what am I doing my makeup for? Am I just like running to the store? Do I have a doctor's appointment? Am I doing something really quick? Or do I need my makeup to last me all day? Am I going on a date? Is this like some big event or something like that? And so in the instances where I really don't need my makeup to last very long, I will use, as safe and natural as possible of products And it's okay that, you know, my makeup doesn't look good after a couple hours. It's okay that it's, you know, all gone or faded, because you know, I don't really need to look made up anymore at that point. And so I will kind of gauge by what I need, what products I use, you know, and then there's some days that I use some products that are really not that natural, or just kind of like a balance, you know, of natural and some man-made things like silicones in there to make them last longer, because, you know, it's really important to me that I'm going to this thing and, you know, I'm not going to look like a hot mess. Because I live in a pretty hot, humid environment in the South, and so a big problem I have is eye makeup, things like eyeliner, mascara. They will, you know, smudge and just, you know, get under my eyes, all under here, and look pretty terrible depending on, you know, on the product. And my eyeshadow tends to crease on me as well, because like if I'm looking straight at you, my eyelids are almost invisible. You know, when I blink, they're like hooded, I think is what it's called, but you know, this part right here and, you know, the part above that, they just like completely fold together. And so because of all that rubbing, when I blink, it makes it really difficult for makeup to last on my eyes, and so I have to use a non-natural eyeshadow primer if I want my eyeshadow to last, you know, for a certain amount of time. And let's talk about silicone for a little bit. That's used a lot in some of these longer lasting, like eyeliner, pencils, cream eyeshadows, etc. It's also used a lot in makeup, especially like liquid makeup or primers. And I do use silicones, and I personally feel comfortable and safe using silicones. I've done a lot of research on them. I know that there's a lot, you know, of information out there, and some of them are kind of more like myths than truth. Silicones do let your skin breathe. That both of my parents are actually chemists, and I've confirmed with them that, you know, the space between the molecules in silicones is large enough for an air molecule to pass through, so they don't effectively block all air from passing through them. They just, you know, cannot do that. And so it's not true that they don't let your skin breathe. However, I do find silicones to be really beneficial for my skin. There's a lot of benefits that they can have to your skin. And one of them is my skin is extremely acne prone. And there's all these ingredients and oils that'll break me out, you know, dependent on how much of it is in a product, etc. And, you know, if I'm sweating, sometimes some products will break me out more on hot days and then kind of dry, cool days. But silicones actually form a nice layer between my skin and my makeup, and not only do they make it last longer, look fresher, I'm talking about like primers, but a lot of times they'll actually allow me to use a makeup that would normally break me out. So maybe I can use a more natural makeup that has, you know, some natural oils in it that I typically wouldn't be able to use. But if I wear a primer, then that allows me to wear kind of a more natural makeup. So I personally feel safe using silicones. I know, you know, that's not everybody's cup of tea, and some people can legitimately have, you know, sensitivities to them, just like to any, you know, any ingredient. And so that's just my, you know, personal thing. And there are definitely some non-natural products I use, like the Kat Von D Tattoo Concealer is my all-time, you know, favorite concealer for underneath my eyes. It's like the only thing I found that works, not just for, you know, a couple hours, but just legitimately works all day, doesn't crease, doesn't settle, actually gives me, you know, awesome coverage. I have looked up all of the ingredients in that concealer, and, you know, they may be man-made and not natural, but they are all rated safely enough for me, you know, on the Skin Deep database, where I feel comfortable using that product. And just to talk about man-made for a little bit, if you take something that is natural, like an oil or whatever, or a mineral, and then you process it, is it still, you know, natural, or is it now man-made because it might not be necessarily present in the form that you have created from it, you know, in real life, like hydrogenated oils, fractionated oil, that is all, you know, man-made technically, because it requires, you know, for people to do something with it, to turn it into that. Minerals, minerals are ground down so finely that there's, nanoparticles now, and there's some concern about nanoparticles being able to actually penetrate your skin because they're so tiny. So that is now technically, mineral makeup, but it's man-made and potentially dangerous if it contains nanoparticles. So there's all these things to consider, and not just, stick to the word natural, because a lot of companies will use natural and organic and they will plaster that all over their products because that's the popular thing to do. That's what makes people buy products, and paraben free is a huge fad now. A lot of companies have removed parabens from their product, even non-natural companies, and they write paraben free, and people are like, oh my gosh, this product is awesome because it's paraben free, I don't have to worry about anything. But it's like, well, what have the parabens been replaced with? Because it needs a preservative to keep it from going bad. Sometimes, if you have a product without preservative that'll, get bacteria and mold growing in there, that's more dangerous to you in a lot of instances than being exposed to a preservative. So sometimes they replace it with even more dangerous preservatives than parabens. So you just kind of have to look at that too. And by the way, there's different types of parabens, but there is, one of, I think there's 3 types or 4 types, but one of the parabens is actually technically natural because it's present in blueberries. So I'm not saying to use parabens, and I avoid them myself, but just, one thing that you may not have known. And one more quick thing about silicones. Silicones are derived from silica, which is sand, glass, whatever. It's all the same thing. It's all silicon dioxide. And that is actually, you have that in your body. It's a mineral that your body needs. You don't think of sand as being dangerous. However, it is, a man-made thing once you process it and turn it into silicone. But just, just to let you know, it comes from something natural. Just like fractionated coconut oil is not natural, but it comes from coconut oil, which is natural. So that's pretty much it. That's my criteria. That's how I choose my cosmetic products. And hopefully this video was, interesting for you to watch. Thank you so much. Bye.